Thank you very much. Can anyone hear me? Okay, sure. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank KIC and the conference organizers for the opportunity to present at this virtual event. I'm also very glad that I'm speaking directly after Dr. Choi because he has set the scene very nicely as to why we should be interested to study cybercrime and also cybersecurity. Okay. So, I'm sure that this comes as no surprise to you in the sense that our society has become more digitalized, more interconnected. For example, if you look around us, whether it's in the office or at home, we have IoT devices, which is also known as Internet of Things. They are around us. For example, your smart home IoT device. You also have your IoT device on us. For example, your Fitbit, your Samsung device, and so on. And also you have your IoT devices in our body as well. For example, you have pacemaker or even artificial limbs, such as arms or legs. Legs, yeah, and so on. So in other words, our surroundings, the place that we are in, and our bodies are increasingly influenced and controlled by digital devices and systems. And these digital devices are constantly talking to each other and exchanging information. They're collected from around us, our surrounding, and also from our body in us, and so on. So as you can see on the slide, this is taken from a fairly recent Gartner research article. Based on this research, they observed that technology is changing the notion of what it means to be human. As workers and citizens see technology as an enhancement of their abilities, our human condition also changed as well. So from an organization perspective or from a society perspective, we need to understand what the effects are of this technology. That has the impact on us, and also to reset our expectation for what this technology means. This is particularly important, especially in the current COVID situation where most of us are actually working and studying from home. And you may also have heard of this terminology, cybernization. So basically, it's actually the process of forming a new cyber world. I think earlier, Dr. Choi mentioned about cyber physical world. Yes, indeed, increasingly, our physical devices, the things around us, the things in us, and our body itself, is actually increasingly interconnected with the cyber world. So that's why we have this new cyber combined worlds, in the sense that we have physical, we have social and mental worlds all combined into one cyber combined worlds, or one bigger ecosystem. So as with any technologies, whether it's the older technologies or the current emerging or contemporary technologies, there are always potential cyber criminal and privacy risks and challenges. For example, Benjamin Franklin once observed that nothing in this world is said to be certain except for death and taxes. I'm sure if we add cyber attacks or cyber crime to this list, no one will actually object to this, right? So from both policing and also cybersecurity perspective, I believe that it's important for us to understand how cyber attacks or cyber attacker can actually take over our system, how they can get into our systems. For example, what witnesses assist in our cyber physical worlds? Are these witnesses in the people, that's you and me, home users? Are these witnesses in the process, or are these witnesses in technologies? It can be any of these or a combination of these. And any of these vulnerabilities can be exploited to get access to not only our data, our system, but also our body, as our body are increasingly interconnected with other devices and systems. So by understanding how cyber attacks can take place, we can then design more effective security solutions. That's why it's important to study both the cybersecurity and also the cyber offensive research. So moving ahead, the threats are no longer in cyberspace, because 10, 20 years ago, we may think, okay, cybercrime malware is only going to affect our system. It's not going to affect us. It's not going to affect my body. But increasingly moving ahead, it's going to be branded. The threats are going to be cyber physical threats, and they are going to have physical consequences. And also the threat actors are no longer script kiddies who are sitting in the garage. They're going to be nation states. They're going to be advanced persistent threat actors. So for example, looking at this screen, I'm not sure how many of you have watched this movie, which is maybe 2 or 3 years now, Fast and Furious 8. So in this scene itself, this is again Hollywood, but again, how true, whether it's feasible, that's something that we can discuss offline. So for example, in this particular scene, the vehicles were actually, vulnerabilities in these vehicles were actually exploited, and hackers actually took over remote control of these vehicles and then caused them to crash. Think about it. Last year, and again 1 or 2 years ago, there were a number of terrorist attacks in Europe, in various countries in Europe, where terrorists actually get behind the wheels and crash into places of mass gatherings. What if, in the future, where instead of someone getting behind the wheels physically, what if someone actually took control of the vehicles by exploiting vulnerabilities in your Tesla or other smart vehicles and use them as weapons of mass destruction and drive them into places of mass gathering. And again, you may think that this is science fiction, this is Hollywood. And I think this is just a few days old, this news on the slide, where a group of researchers from Belgium, they actually find a way, they actually find an exploit that can actually allow them to steal a Tesla Model S in minutes using hardware that costs only $300. And this is something that's doable. So right now, it may not be possible to really remote control a vehicle and cause it to crash, but in the future, that could happen. Well, I mean, unlike physical crime, I mean, unlike our traditional crime, cybercrime is much harder to attribute and identify. For example, how are we able to identify or accurately attribute who is actually behind the keyboard, who is actually carrying out the attack? Even someone who actually designed the malware, or if you do a IP tracing, the last IP address is not necessarily the attacker. In most cases, the last IP address is also probably the victim because they have been compromised to carry out the attack. So how are we going to attribute, or how are we going to identify who the perpetrator is? Is it your next door neighbor, or is it a nation state? And again, there's really no clear-cut definition between cyber war and cybercrime. So I'm sure many of you in the audience have heard of cyber war. And again, what constitutes cyber war? We know the distinction between a war and crime, but when it comes to cyberspace, it's hard to actually make that distinction between cyber war and cybercrime, especially where many of the tools, many of the techniques used, they overlap. You can use the same malware, or you can use the same exploit in the cyber criminal activity, or you can use the same exploit and tool in the cyber crime-like activity. And again, why do we really need to understand, or why do we really need to attribute who the attacker or who the offender is? Well, because the response protocol are different. For example, if it's a cyber war or national security event, most likely the responding agency will be National Security Agency, or for example, in the US, it might be FBI or other agencies. Whereas when it comes to cybercrime, it's most likely going to be your state or local law enforcement agencies. So the protocol are actually different. And again, when it comes to cyberspace, there's many ways to plant false flag. I'm not sure how many of you in the audience is familiar with this term. So basically, this is an attack, a cyber attack. It's staged in such a way that attempts to fool their victims and the world into believing who is actually behind the attack. So for example, a nation's group A may be carrying out the attack, but they are trying to impersonate group B, and by using the tools, the techniques, and even using the coding in a certain language to try to run a false flag operation, a false flag cyber operation. And then the question is how easy or how challenging it is to actually conduct such a false flag cyber operation. It really depends. And as long as you have the resources, it's not that hard at all. And again, this is going to complicate attack attribution, and also when it comes to evidence, whether can we trust the evidence that we actually collected from the compromised systems? So there are a number of implications. And many of these IoT, many of the systems that we use, whether it's at home, whether it's in office, they're actually not designed with security in mind. And I think Dr. Choi actually has shown Shogun, so I'm not going to go through that. And again, as Dr. Choi has mentioned, it's very easy for anyone with no skill set at all to just use a search engine, Shogun and others, to actually find vulnerable IoT devices. And once you find them, you can actually use off-the-shelf tools to actually exploit those devices. And in fact, some of these devices, the users do not actually change the default username and password. So it's very easy for anyone to actually gain access, remote access of this, for example, your CCTV cameras or your ring camera, and then to actually be able to conduct surveillance or gain access into the homes. And this is a study we did 2 years ago. So basically, we did a passive scan of the IoT devices out there. What we want to find out is how many vulnerable IoT devices are there out there? Is that in the thousands, in the millions, or what? So basically, we, as part of this research, and again, I mentioned it's about 2 years old now, we actually identify a number of in the wild IoT coordinated probing campaigns. So these probing campaigns are not necessarily malicious because they could be carried out by researchers, I mean, another group like us, who want to understand the cyber threat landscape for IoT devices. But what is more concerning is we actually identify more than 120,000 internet scale exploited IoT devices. And some of these IoT devices are actually operating in critical infrastructure sectors, such as your DAM, your DAM, or your smart grid, or some of your IT sectors. And we were actually able to infer over 140 large-scale IoT-centric probing campaigns as well. And in this case, because this is a research, we could not actually engage with these vulnerable IoT devices, but anyone, I mean, any cyber criminals could actually have gone a step further and trying to exploit these IoT devices to gain access to data or to gain access to whatever is connected to them. And again, there are a number of tools. I think Dr. Choi has mentioned earlier as well, Metasploit. So there are a number of tools, there are a number of off-the-shelf tools, commercial and free tools out there that actually allow anyone with very minimal skill set to actually identify vulnerabilities in systems, devices, and then gain control of these devices and systems. This is actually a work that we've done quite recently. So basically, we use deep learning, which is a form of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So we actually try to fast for vulnerabilities, unknown vulnerabilities in IoT systems. So in this particular case, using our techniques, we actually managed to identify 9 previously unknown vulnerabilities, including a vulnerability in a middleware from Huawei, which is a Chinese company, that actually allow us to carry out denial of service attack or trying to crash a system that actually deploy this middleware. And this is just one of many works out there. I mean, trying to identify vulnerabilities is actually a very active research area. Okay, when it comes to digital forensics, data may not always be available for a range of reasons. For example, in terms of short data retention time, in terms of a lack of extraction capabilities, whether it's by law enforcement or by organizations, as well as the cost associated with conducting such an investigation. So as a result, when it comes to collecting data about an incident which has just occurred, they may not be able to identify the cause of the security incident. And why do we need to understand what caused the incident? Because by doing so, we are able to identify what happened, how the attacker got into the system. I mean, what exploit or what vulnerabilities were actually leveraged or abused to actually gain access to the system, what data was stolen, who was responsible, and so on. So we are able to identify, we are able to build a timeline. So hopefully we are able to understand what has happened, and we are able to design better mitigation solutions to prevent the same thing from happening again in the future. However, it's not realistic to suggest that any item connected to the target device can also be automatically seized for forensic data collection, because many of these devices, because they're IoT, they're internet connected, they can be sitting somewhere else in another country, in another city, or even in a cloud data center, say from one of the big companies. So it's just there's just no way for us to be able to collect the data in real time. So that's why a few years ago, my student and I, we actually proposed a concept called forensic by design, or also known as forensic ready systems. So forensic by design is somewhat conceptually very similar to secure by design or privacy by design, which I believe many of you in the audience will be somewhat familiar with. So secure by design means that you design the system from day one with security in mind. So you have the built-in authentication mechanism, you have the built-in intrusion detection mechanism, and so on. Whereas privacy by design, as the name suggests, you build the system from day one to think about privacy, how to actually ensure the privacy of the data of the user. When it comes to forensic by design, so basically what we have in mind is, so when something happens, you know where to look for evidence. For example, many of us have flew on aeroplanes. So when the plane crash, unfortunately, where do we look for evidence? We look for evidence in the black box, also known as a cockpit recorder. So what we are trying to propose here is somewhat similar in concept. So when a system was hacked or when a system was compromised, when you need to conduct an investigation, so instead of trying to look around the system, trying to identify where the data is or where the evidence could sit, I mean, we can actually go to this black box, and this black box can be a centralized or a decentralized black box, so that you can actually get the evidence, collect the evidence that you need. So this, okay, if you can see this figure, so basically we are thinking about what the black box is actually this item 3, the secure multi-tenant storage. So basically, all the data, and again, this stuff, you may ask, so what sort of data is this digital forensic black box going to collect? And again, it can be customized based on the organization. So based on the sector, by understanding what is important, what data is actually important to the organization, and what type of system or what type of network is actually being deployed. So and again, as I mentioned earlier, this black box can actually be centralized or decentralized. And again, because all these evidence are actually stored in this black box, you have to ensure the integrity of the data. So security is actually very important. So once you have this data, and this data collected in this digital forensic black box, it's not just for use for forensic purpose, but it can also be used to train your machine learning model. Because by collecting all this information, you're able to train your machine learning model to identify what is the normal behavior in your network and what is abnormal behavior, so that you can actually detect any intrusions in real time. And again, when it comes to digital forensic or even cybersecurity, how do we actually share information, or how do we actually share knowledge about how to conduct a vulnerability assessment, or how to go about doing forensic analysis of the newer device, for example, IoT device? And just think about IoT devices. There's so many IoT devices out there. There's such a broad range of IoT device. It's almost impossible to find someone or even a team of forensic investigators to actually know all the IoT devices, to know how to go about collecting evidence about all the IoT devices, because they have different operating systems. They may have different file system or even firmware versions. So the question, one of the challenges here is actually how do we actually efficiently and effectively share information or share knowledge about these forensic artifacts? For example, where their location could be, as in the location of the artifacts, what are the forensic implications, the value of the artifacts, and also their data structure. We are sharing the artifacts themselves, because in most cases, some of these artifacts are somewhat private. They consist of potentially PII, personal identifier information, or some information relating to the IP of an organization. So how do we actually share this knowledge? We are sharing the artifacts themselves. So what we proposed in this work, again, that was last year, we actually came out with a schema that actually allow us to capture. A schema you can think of is some sort of a high-level abstract template, where basically, for example, if you analyze a phone, for example, iPhone, the latest iPhone or the latest IoT device, some IoT device. So by doing a forensic analysis of this IoT, and in-depth forensic analysis of this IoT device, you are able to identify, okay, so what are the potential type of forensic artifacts we can collect from this type of device? So where are the locations, in the sense that where can I collect these artifacts from? So what are the forensic implications? What are the data structures? In what format are they stored? And how can I share them? And what are the likely size and so on? Or what tools can I use to collect these artifacts? So we extract them into a template, and then we can share the template. So basically, by sharing the template, we are sharing the knowledge. We are actually sharing the artifacts themselves. So we come out with the prototypes. So we actually have a working prototype. So basically, you are able to actually load the case, and then from the collection, so you are able to abstract the information, the digital forensic artifacts, by doing the forensic analysis. And then from there, you are able to actually abstract the schema and then share. And in this case, the schema or template can actually be shared either through your organization, or it can be a cloud-based or community-based platform that you can share with other participating law enforcement agencies or other organizations. And again, this is our template. So basically, so from this schema itself, you are able to know that, okay, if you are doing an examination of this device, so these are the type of artifacts that you're most likely going to encounter, and where you can actually get them from, as I mentioned earlier. So again, the platform can be a cloud-based, or we can as well use blockchain. So in this particular work, because as I mentioned earlier, many of these data, when it comes to sharing the data, it can be sensitive. So we may not want to share this data, but at the same time, we want to share our knowledge. So in addition to the platform dimension of the schema, but because increasingly we are using machine learning in digital forensics. For example, we want to train our AI model, as in try to identify the potential forensic artifacts that can be collected from these different devices, especially from devices that we have never encountered. So how can we actually train this machine learning model? We are actually getting access to the raw data itself, which is the forensic artifacts. So in this case, we actually built a blockchain-based trading data trading platform using Intel SGX. So basically, in this platform itself, we actually provide APIs to actually the various data sets. So depending, for example, if we have data set A, B, and C, owned by organizations A, B, and C, whereas A, B, and C, they are not allowed to share their data set, their raw data set, but they're actually allowed researchers to train the machine learning model on their data sets through some APIs. So this is what we propose, actually using a blockchain-based platform to actually facilitate the sharing of data, the training of AI models, and so on. And there are a number of potential research opportunities. So when it comes to big data, when it comes to digital forensics, these days, it's not about lack of data. In fact, there's so much data out there that it's impossible to analyze. So how do we actually do a triage? So when we are doing a triage, what are the potential implications? What about selection bias? So for example, if we use machine learning model, because many of the machine learning models, they are not interpretable, they are not explainable. So how do we actually explain, how to actually prevent selection bias in the sense that why is this evidence, or why are these set of forensic artifacts chosen and over another set of forensic artifacts? Is there any way that we can actually explain that? Because there's so much data out there, as I mentioned earlier, there's no way we can actually examine everything. So how do we actually more effectively select the right set of forensic artifacts to examine? And also when it comes to forensic ready tools, and I mean earlier we have a look at Shodan. So there's search engine out there like Google, Shodan for various purposes. Do we have a similar search engine for forensic? So for example, if I want to do a forensic investigation, I want to search for say certain artifacts A. All I have to do is just to go to the search engine and then search for artifacts A, and it's going to present the result just like Google or just like Shodan. But the thing is, there's no such search engine right now for forensic analysis. So can we actually design a Google-like search engine, something like Hadoop for big data analytics or TensorFlow for AI? Can we design something like this for forensic analysis, whether it's IoT or digital forensics? And also, as I mentioned earlier, machine learning. So how can we actually use machine learning to help us facilitate real-time incident response and forensic investigation? For example, earlier I mentioned about the digital forensic black box. Because right now, one of the challenges when it comes to digital forensic research or investigation is there's a lack of data in the well. There's a lack of publicly accessible data in the sense that every agency they have their own data based on the cases they have investigated. But the thing is, those data cannot be shared because of privacy reasons, because of various legislation reasons. So how can we actually facilitate the sharing of this data? That's why in the earlier slide, we proposed this data sharing platform. So can we actually use some sort of a data sharing platform where we actually train our machine learning model on this confidential, this private data set, in a way that we still can train the machine learning model or the deep learning model to help us to more efficiently conduct forensic investigation. We are actually getting access to raw data during the training. And again, because we only have 10 to 15 minutes today, so I didn't have time to go into deepfake. But again, I think deepfake is something that has been in the news for at least in the last 6 to 12 months. So there are many deepfakes out there, whether it's text, audio, and videos. So the thing is, can we trust the evidence that we are going to present in court? How do we know that the evidence we present in court is actually real, the real thing, and not some deepfake materials? So can we actually use machine learning or deep learning approach to actually help us defeat or detect deepfake materials? And how confident are we when we present evidence that in court that this is actually fake or this is not fake? And at the same time, because to me, I believe cybersecurity and digital forensics, they go hand in hand. Because in order to gain access to the data on the devices, in many cases, we need to use exploit. We need to exploit vulnerabilities in some systems, whether it's operating systems or in the implementation error of an encryption algorithm in order to get access to data. So again, on the topic of machine learning, can we actually use machine learning to help us identify and exploit vulnerabilities to gain access to evidence for a court purpose? Well, it may be controversial depending on which country you are working at or the legal systems. And another potential topic is actually explainable AI in digital forensics, especially for court. So if you use AI techniques to actually help you collect evidence, or you use AI techniques to help you analyze the evidence, are you able to explain in court as to how do you actually arrive at these decisions? Because right now, many of the algorithms, as I mentioned, is actually black box. So there's no way that you can actually explain how did this algorithm actually arrive at this decision. All you know is I input this, I provide this input, and this is the output that I get. I have no idea what goes in the box. That's why it's a black box. So can we actually design explainable AI techniques to help us to conduct some of the digital forensic analysis or even collection of evidence? And then we are at the same time, we are still able to explain what goes on. So as I mentioned earlier, I think data set is actually one of the challenge when it comes to doing forensic analysis. So right now, we're actually building a honeynet architecture for IoT device, where we are going to have both physical and virtual devices. So what we are hoping to understand here is, because this is a honeynet, so we are going to expose part of the honeynet to the outside world. So what we are hoping to see is how to actually understand, how do actually the attackers actually attack the system? What exploit do they use? how do they actually go around doing the reconnaissance. So basically, I think Thomas Hott earlier in his keynote speech, he mentioned about crime script. So basically, we are hoping to build a crime script here to actually explain some of the cyber criminal activities so that we can better understand the behavior. And then based on this data and based on this behavior, we can maybe actually train our machine learning models to better detect some of this intrusion as well. So with that, I end my presentation. And again, thank you for your time.